Average Joe travels the California Inscape. Season 6, Body Double Trouble. Episode 2, Games of Bones. Story by Penguin Pete Turbovich. Written by Dodge Zelko. Magi Trophies mounted by Clyde Wrenn. Featuring the vocal stylings of This Is Signal, with Asher Ephraim as Spanky. That night, Spanky's Cobra sighting imprinted itself on my dreams. I lay paralyzed in my hotel bed, staring at the squirming blackness of the ceiling. It was a veritable vault of vipers, a rotunda of racers, a cupola of copperheads. Jaundiced moonlight caught the glimmer of their scales, and, more distressingly, their gemstone eyes. I woke to the sensation of one of these little demons lapping at my chin, a frisky tickle both smooth and rough. Yelping like a chow-chow, I whipped my assailant off of me. Samantha was none too appreciative. For, as it turned out, there were no snakes. Only a cat trying to be helpful. It was 9:30, and I had missed my alarm. The sheets were clammy, my skin itchy, my blood thrumming like I'd already downed 6 pots of coffee. There were knocks at the door, as urgent and staccato as my current heart rate.
In there. Open up, you sleazy drunk bastard. Way to keep your friends waiting. You expect us to do all the legwork while you lie around sucking bromo. We know you're in there, gobshite. Your halitosis precedes you. Spanky can smell it through the door.
After this spirited greeting, I heard a tiny boot launch several soft kicks at the door. Anne spoke up next, a touch more sympathetic.
Joe, is everything all right? We got your note, but you never showed.
Note? What note? Legwork? Promo? The day was hurling too much at me already, and I hadn't even set a foot on the floor. Coming! One moment. I was just, pressing my suit. Samantha glared at me, quite justifiably, as I hobbled over to the door and undid the lock. My self-described friends piled in, Spanky's face rosy with outrage, which, I have to say, was preferable to Anne's dark look of suspicion. She inspected my quarters, including the unmade bed, including the threadbare undershirt and striped boxers that constituted my sleeping attire.
What happened, Joe? Where were you? You went back to sleep, and I summoned Samantha to find you. What's she doing in here?
Giving me palpitations, that's what. I rubbed my chest, where my percussive heartbeat was regressing in its own time from bebop to swing. I was once again becoming a cool customer.
Put some pants on, you dirty lout. What kind of establishment do you think this is? We're not in one of your cheap chatterskull cha-cha-cha joints.
I snatched my pleated slacks from the chair over which they were draped. For the record, I didn't go back to sleep. I never got up to begin with.
That's impossible.
Over the course of our career, Anne and I had witnessed many impossible feats. Dare I say, miracles. My missing an alarm clock hardly took top billing. She produced from her pocket a slip of hotel stationery and thrust it at me just as I was fumbling into my pants. I suppose a little privacy is too much to ask at this point.
You got some gangly chicken legs, boyo, you know that? You ought to try squats. Look at old Spanky's calves. Here, take a gander. Like the gams of an Olympian.
He hiked up one green trouser leg. I ignored him and took the paper from Anne. It was a message jotted, somewhat improbably, in my own handwriting, or at least a close facsimile thereof. I read it aloud. You go ahead. I'll catch up. Checking something at the old Slater Hospital. My. If I wrote this, my imagination was certainly firing on all cylinders last night, because I haven't the faintest clue what or where this Slater Hospital is supposed to be.
Spanky and I took a cab to the cemetery. You can imagine our concern when you didn't show.
Spanky harumphed. Judging from the strident abuse I'd woken to, I wagered concern hadn't been their chief sentiment. I folded the note and went to slip it into my breast pocket. Then I remembered I didn't have one. Let's put a pin in that for now. Someone is clearly trying to sow division in the ranks. Either that, or they slipped it under the wrong door. I suppose we can't rule that out either. Occam's razor and all. Sharpened by Occam's strop. Occam's shaving soap provided by Barbasol. Speaking of which, I could do with a shave. And a proper shirt. How about I meet you two in the lobby in 15 minutes, and we try today over again?
Okay, but don't be leaving us high and dry. 15 minutes, or the next time Spanky knocks, it'll be with a pickaxe.
That settled it. The trio cleared from my room, counting Samantha, mind you, and I set about lathering up my jaw, puzzling all the while over that mysterious note. I knew one thing for sure. I would never have crossed my T's like that. Far too ostentatious. After a light breakfast of pilfered crackers and cold coffee, Spanky relished in detailing what a lavish buffet I'd missed. We were back at Reaper's Row. Anne brought a selection of bits and bobs meant to ferret out vampires. This included a small circular mirror glazed over with black candle wax, a garland of origami bats strung not from twine but the dehydrated intestines of an undisclosed species, and, last but not least, our trusty and ever-applicable Ouija board. Honestly, Hasbro ought to be one of our official sponsors. We checked at the grave of H. Quinn Landry, whose grieving widow Howie Hatecraft had warned us to steer clear of. Landry's headstone was an impressive Christian minaret. Some tributes had been left, namely a carton of Lucky Strikes and a bottle of J&B.
You suppose he's gonna drink all that?
Hands off. The last thing we need is for you to get us hexed. Wouldn't want any more snakes popping out of our suits, now would we?
Spanky shuddered. Recalling my lucid nightmare, so did I. The unreflective mirror and origami bats proved fruitless. Evidently, they weren't fruit bats.
Steady on there.
Sorry. So, it boiled down to the board game, and our fortunes changed for the better. The dead became acutely outspoken. The spirit of the occupant of the first grave was a quarrelsome sort. He demanded to know who we were, what business we had there, whether we had any respect whatsoever for Presbyterian burial rites. But also, since we were bothering him, could we at least pass along to Cornelia that her offerings at his headstone did nothing to make up for that tryst with the greengrocer? His grievances were so numerous that Anne finally let go of the planchette and suggested we move on to another grave. We spent the better part of 3 hours in this fashion, roving from site to site, making the acquaintance of many departed, some more endearing than others, but none of them helpful or able to shed light on the strange disappearances benighting these grounds. At one point, as I wandered off alone to savor a Lucky Strike snuck from Landry's carton, an apparition caught my eye. It was a woman in black. She wore a veil and clutched a wilted bouquet of tiger lilies. My blood went cold. I swallowed smoke. Yet, as I went on observing her, I became convinced that she was real, that is, alive, and thought I might hazard an approach. I broke the ice in a typical manner, commenting on the morose weather, offering her a smoke. She accepted graciously, said her name was Marigold. Marigold Balatinetti. Owing to the veil, I couldn't divine much of a description beyond that she spoke in a smoldering contralto, like a bonfire put out by rain, the rain being, in this case, the death of her 4-year-old son, Anthony.
He was mauled by a large bird of prey. It happened so quickly I couldn't even identify what kind. An eagle or a vulture. Maybe even a large hawk.
Was it perhaps a goose?
I saw it all from the parlor window as I was looming. Not looming over Anthony, mind you. Looming over my table runner. I'm a weaver by trade. The table runner was a very special project, commissioned by the Knights of Columbus. I had it on the loom when he died. It would have been my magnum opus. I can say that without embarrassment. But I shall never finish now. Out of respect for Anthony, I've abdicated the commission. It's gone to Abigail Roderick. Very deserving, but not half as gifted as I. I've renounced my gift. Do you see? Weaving was my calling. I took to the loom like a duck to whatever a duck excels at. It hardly matters. I eschew all birds now, big or small. Nothing matters without Anthony. Nothing. Not life itself. Thanks again for the cigarette.
All through her harrowing speech, I'd been holding my colibri at the ready. Marigold finally lifted her veil and bent forward, permitting me to light the lucky strike. But she forgot to inhale. Her eyes honed in on something over my shoulder. I turned around and saw that she was fixated on Anne. The cigarette betrayed a tremble. It danced loosely in her lips, like a springboard after a swan dive, then fell to the earth. Her color drained. She made her leave with an implausible hybrid excuse.
I have to go make sure my stove, remember to feed the cat.
Then she bolted to a curvy little white Porsche parked beneath a cottonwood and peeled off faster than you can say requiescat in pace. How do you like that? A weaver with a Porsche. If the PI gig ever dries up, I should look into textiles. Not one to litter or waste, I plucked her lucky off the grass and granted it amnesty in my own mouth. It tasted waxy with lipstick.
Who was that?
Spanky and Anne were still monkeying around with the Ouija board, attempting to tap the information line to the dead. Marigold Balatinetti.
Oh, yeah. And what'd she have to say? From here, she looked like a tart.
You should go easy on the tart shaming. Her son was killed by a hawk. Also, she didn't seem to like the cut of your jib, Anne.
Me?
Anne looked herself up and down, unwontedly self-conscious. Her face reddened.
You've been drawing some queer attention since we first disembarked. Remember that lady at the depot? The one who called you Zelda?
You think that might be related?
Who's to say? All I know is the dead aren't half as forthcoming as I might have hoped, and the living are twice as creepy. I suggest we pack it up and brainstorm a new strategy, preferably over lunch. Those crackers didn't quite do it for me.
As for Spanky, he thinks your jib is cut splendidly, man.
Thank you, Spanky. That's very kind of you to say.
Next, we visited inside the mortuary to converse with Howie Hatecraft's staff. They had the exhumed coffin of H. Quinn Landry there, so we inspected every nook and cranny of the showroom new casket and concluded that Landry could not have been a zombie, since zombies trash the whole coffin when they claw their way to the surface. Likewise, the empty casket of the other exhumed occupant was equally pristine. This was the grave of a hobo, whom the police suspected might have been the one along the railroad who made a career of killing off other hobos to rob them of their spare change earned from hard labor. Mr. Hatecraft had mentioned that the police were the only party concerned with the body's present location. Anne even checked inside for magic runes or whatever occult instruments might aid the recently deceased in vacating their intended final resting place. Coming up dry, she slammed the lid closed in exasperation. Admitting defeat, at least for the time being, we returned to the hotel, only to be thwarted yet again when the desk clerk informed us they did not offer lunch service, only breakfast and supper.
2 meals a day. What are we, prisoners of war? Shipwrecked on a desert feckin' island?
I felt just as cranky as my companion, but kept a brave face. Actually, the same face I always keep. Probably because I'm always brave. All right. Well, perhaps you can assist us in another way. I took out the forged note I had supposedly slipped under Anne's door. Does the phrase Slater Hospital mean anything to you? A black telephone rang on the desk. Without glancing its way, the clerk lifted the receiver and slammed it back down. Hard enough that the three of us flinched. Why, yes. There's a Slater State Mental Hospital on the outskirts of Ruby Peaks, but it's been abandoned for decades. Some awfully unsavory rumors swirl around that place.
Have you ever heard a savory rumor? 'Cause Spanky sure hasn't.
Shush. What sorts of rumors?
The telephone rang again, and the same procedure ensued, though this time we were braced for it. Then the clerk leaned in. He narrowed his gaze at us, checking this way and that to make sure we weren't overheard. By whom, I wasn't quite sure, as I'd yet to see another guest. He spoke in a furtive hiss. His breath smelled faintly unreliable, and made me crave a midday cocktail. I already told you what sort, ma'am. Awfully unsavory ones. The government shut them down long ago for dozens of health violations. They housed murderers and rapists, all kinds of sick loons, and kept them chained in rat-infested dungeons and fed wormy meat. Some who died there are buried at Reaper's Row. Place is haunted, hexed, cursed, and damned. Local teenagers go there to party on Halloween, but come back home screaming about ghosts. Or some don't come home at all, and are never heard from again.